Avoidance works. That's why we do it. But unfortunately, it's a quick fix, and it actually makes anxiety worse over time. Think about when you're really starving, and what you should be doing is having a meal, but instead you grab a coffee or a chocolate. And initially, yes, it does feel nice. You feel awake, you feel alive. But shortly after that, you start to feel worse. And then you're really starving and you're hungrier than ever. Well, anxiety and avoidance work a lot like that. I'm Dr. Colin Linda, clinical psychologist and CBT therapist. And today we'll be talking about all things avoidance, the difference between good avoidance and bad avoidance, and what happens when you feed the bad avoidance. Now, you may have heard of the fear of fear cycle in panic, where you're so scared of feeling that awful feeling again that you start to anticipate, and then you start to get horrible physical symptoms just thinking about it before you've even been anywhere. But maybe you didn't realize that actually it's your thoughts starting up the symptoms and not the place or the situation that you were thinking about. So in the end, you end up avoiding the wrong thing, the places, activities where you might get another panic attack. Let's take a common one, driving. So maybe you had a panic attack on the highway or during busy traffic on a specific part of the road, and now you avoid that particular road. But after a while, your brain thinks maybe it's a good idea to avoid any road that's similar, that looks busy, that could be a highway, that could have lots of traffic so you can't pull over. And after a while, your brain starts to tell you, let's just avoid any road and any traffic. Maybe you can just drive around the block at home. And what happens is your world starts to shrink, becoming smaller and smaller as the avoidance gets bigger and bigger. Avoidance works on the principle of generalization. So basically anything that resembles what you're afraid of makes it onto the threat list in the primitive brain. It's like if a dog threatened to bite you today, and let's say it was a Rottweiler. Then next week you visit a friend who's got a Rottweiler, you know this dog very well, but now suddenly your brain is suspicious. So even if you know logically, I know this dog, it's well trained, it's actually friendly to me, it's never been aggressive, the primitive brain now wants to avoid it, just in case. And over time, you start to avoid any big dog, even a poodle or a retriever, and eventually all dogs, even tiny ones. So at this point, it might be good to remind you that the primitive brain, where all of this sits, is like a security guard. It does reflex and it reacts. It does no logic and no reasoning. So once something is on that threat list, the second something similar to this appears, it will trigger the fight or flight reflex. And because the security part, the primitive brain, is very much threat or not threat, all or nothing thinking, it will err on the side of, well, it might be a threat, so let me just put it on the threat list in case. Remember, it's trying to keep you safe. So from Rottweiler to tiny Maltese, you've got to then avoid all dogs. So you can see how this principle is working. So avoidance actually feeds panic. And one of the most powerful CBT tools we have to start to dismantle this is called exposure. I bet your primitive brain didn't like that word. It does sound a bit like a threat, doesn't it? Fortunately, in CBT, we don't do surprises, we work as a team, and we always start small and realistic, as in we do graded exposure from smallest to largest. CBT is all about retraining your brain, not through force, but through repeated safe experience. And CBT is basically teaching you to gradually face what you've been avoiding. And this could be a crowded mall, driving alone, or simply allowing your heart rate to rise without rushing to stop it. So the goal here is not to be fearless. It's to prove to yourself, I can feel this and still be okay. And this is how we slowly dismantle the bad avoidance. So what is good avoidance? Can avoidance ever be okay? First of all, we are wired to avoid what hurts us, what scares us, and what could be a threat, which makes a lot of sense when it's something actually life-threatening, things with teeth or claws or weapons. So that is one form of good avoidance. Another form is to do with capacity, when you really don't have the bandwidth or the energy to do something, like say exercise or go to a social event. And you really do know deep down when it's real or when it's a story that we're trying to convince ourselves about. We know the difference at a deep gut level. So it's really about listening to the still small voice, which isn't making a big noise with thoughts and feelings. It's that still small gut feel. Remember, thoughts and feelings will be back and forth, self-doubt, trying to convince you. Whereas the still small voice happens very quickly and it just says yes or no. That's for another video. So in the context of panic, that intuition, still small voice, will guide you as to what capacity you have when you want to do an exposure. So sometimes you won't feel like it, but you will know that you've got a little bit of capacity. So we're not listening to the thoughts, because the thoughts are saying, this is scary, this is dangerous. We're listening to that still small voice about the capacity. And that voice will also tell you how far you can push, pushing just that little bit more, and when you've really had enough and you're going to do harm. If you'd like to know more about this, feel free to go to my self-help website. It's a free self-help CBT website called thoughtsfirst.com. And on this, you can find many resources, including your free download called CBT Panic Tips. If this has helped you, please share and please subscribe. And join me for the next video, where I'll take you through the secrets to successful exposure.